The year is 1837. In a small, dusty village in southern China, a young man named Hong Xiuquan is dying, or so his family thinks. He has just failed the grueling imperial civil service exams for the third time. In 19th century China, this isn't just a personal failure, it is a death sentence for his family's social and financial ambitions. The pressure has caused a total mental and physical collapse. For days, Hong is trapped in a terrifying delirium. He has visions of being taken up to a radiant heavenly palace. He sees an old man with a golden beard who hands him a sword and tells him to slay the demons that have overrun the earth. Beside the old man stands a middle-aged figure whom Hong identifies as his elder brother. At the time, Hong has no idea what these visions mean. He eventually recovers, returns to his life as a humble village teacher, and tries the exams one more time. He fails again. But in 1843, he picks up a Christian pamphlet given to him years earlier by a missionary. As he reads the translated words of the Bible, the fevered dream of his past returns with a terrifying clarity. The old man with the golden beard was God the Father. The elder brother was Jesus Christ. And Hong realizes that he is the younger brother of Jesus, sent by God to cleanse China of the demon Manchu Qing Dynasty. This was the spark that ignited the Taiping Rebellion, a 14-year apocalypse that would claim between 20 and 30 million lives. To put that in perspective, that is more people than were killed in the entirety of World War I. It remains the deadliest civil war in human history, and it all began because a failed student decided his family tree included the Messiah. To understand how this madness spread, one must look at the state of China under the Qing Dynasty. The empire was rotting. The British had recently humiliated China in the First Opium War, forcing the country to open its ports and pay massive reparations. Poverty was absolute. Famine was common. The ruling Manchus were seen by the ethnic Han majority as foreign oppressors who had lost the mandate of heaven. When Hong Xiuquan began preaching in the mountains of Guangxi, he wasn't just offering a new religion, he was offering a total subversion of the failing world order. He called his movement the God Worshippers' Society. He didn't just preach about salvation in the next life. He preached about a radical utopia in this one. He promised his followers that under his heavenly kingdom of great peace, all land would be shared. There would be no private property. Men and women would be equal, an unthinkable concept in 1840s China. He banned foot binding, opium, tobacco, and alcohol. He replaced the ancient Confucian texts with his own version of the Bible, one where he was the central figure. By 1850, Hong had over 10,000 followers. They weren't just worshippers, they were a community that had sold all their possessions to create a holy treasury. When the Qing government finally realized the threat and sent troops to disperse them, the God worshippers didn't scatter. They fought back with a fanatical intensity that shocked the imperial generals. These were peasants who believed that if they died for the heavenly king, they would ascend instantly to the heavenly palace to join their father and elder brother. You cannot intimidate an army that is eager to die. Hong officially declared the start of the Taiping Rebellion in 1851. His army began a massive northward march toward the heart of China. It was a movement of the dispossessed, miners, charcoal burners, and starving farmers. As they moved, they grew. By the time they reached the Yangtze River, the Taiping force numbered in the hundreds of thousands. They were a locust swarm of red-turbaned zealots, smashing Buddhist temples and executing any Qing official they caught. In March 1853, the rebellion achieved its greatest victory. They laid siege to Nanjing, one of the most important and symbolic cities in China. When the walls finally fell, the slaughter was absolute. The Taiping soldiers, believing the Manchus to be literal demons in human skin, executed every member of the Manchu garrison, men, women, and children. Nanjing was renamed Tianjin, the heavenly capital. Hong Xiuquan retreated into a massive, gilded palace built by the forced labor of his followers and largely withdrew from public life. He left the administration of his kingdom to his kings, a group of loyal generals who were granted divine titles. Inside the walls of Nanjing, the Taiping utopia took a dark and surreal turn. Hong's laws were enforced with brutal precision. Because he wanted to create a pure society, he ordered the absolute separation of the sexes. Even married couples were forbidden from living together or having sex on pain of death. Men lived in military barracks, women lived in separate quarters, and were organized into their own labor and military units. Yet, while his subjects were executed for the slightest hint of lust, Hong Xiuquan lived in a world of unimaginable excess. He occupied a palace fanned by dozens of concubines, claiming that, as the Son of God, the rules of mortal men did not apply to him. The hypocrisy started to breed resentment among his top commanders, but the war outside the walls was so brutal that internal dissent remained a secondary concern. From 1853 to 1860, central China became a landscape of unrelenting horror. The Taiping were fighting a total war against the Qing, and neither side took prisoners. The scale of the conflict was so vast it is difficult to comprehend. Battles often involved hundreds of thousands of combatants on each side. Because the Taiping had banned traditional trade and farming practices in favor of their communal system, the economy of the Yangtze Valley collapsed. Famine followed the armies. In many provinces, the civilian population was reduced to eating grass, bark, and, eventually, the bodies of the dead. The rebellion reached its peak and its breaking point in 1856 with the Tianjin incident. The Eastern king, Yang Xiuqing, had become the true power behind the throne. Yang claimed that he could channel the voice of God the Father. In these trances, he would berate Hong Xiuquan, even ordering the brother of Jesus to be whipped for his supposed failings. Hong, paranoid and sensing a coup, ordered his other generals to assassinate Yang. The result was a week of bloodletting inside the capital. Not only was the Eastern king killed, but over 20,000 of his followers and their families were butchered in the streets. The rebellion had begun to eat itself. As the Taiping fractured, the Qing Dynasty found an unlikely ally, the West. Initially, the British and French were curious about the Christian rebels. They sent missionaries to Nanjing to meet with Hong, but the missionaries were horrified. They found a man who claimed to be divine, who had rewritten the Ten Commandments, and who believed he had a direct mandate to rule the entire world. The Western powers realized that a Taiping victory would be a disaster for international trade and stability. The British authorized the creation of the ever-victorious Army, a mercenary force equipped with modern Western rifles and artillery, led by officers like the charismatic Charles Chinese Gordon. For the first time, the Taiping's medieval-style religious fanaticism met the industrial power of the 19th century West. The Taiping soldiers, who believed their faith made them invulnerable to bullets, were mowed down by the thousands by repeating rifles and steam-powered gunboats. By 1862, the tide had turned. The Qing imperial armies, now better organized and supported by Western advisors, began to systematically retake the territories the Taiping had held for a decade. One by one, the heavenly cities fell. The Qing followed a scorched earth policy. Every city retaken from the rebels was subjected to a massacre to ensure the poison of the Taiping faith was eradicated. In 1864, the final siege of Nanjing began. The city was surrounded by 500,000 Qing troops. Inside, the situation was apocalyptic. There was no food left. Hong Xiuquan, now increasingly delusional and sickly, refused to surrender. He told his starving followers that God would provide. He ordered the citizens to eat manna, which he claimed was a divine gift from heaven. In reality, it was a mixture of wild weeds and toxic fungi he found growing in the palace gardens. Hong ate the manna himself and fell into a final fatal illness. On June 1st, 1864, Hong Xiuquan died in his palace. He was 50 years old. Some accounts suggest he committed suicide by poison. Others believe he died from the very manna he had ordered his people to eat. His body was wrapped in yellow silk and buried beneath his palace. A month later, the Qing armies detonated a massive mine beneath the city. Walls. They poured into Nanjing with a fury built up over 14 years of civil war. The slaughter lasted for 3 days. Almost none of the remaining Taiping followers survived. Those who weren't killed by the Qing committed mass suicide, setting fire to their homes and burning themselves alive rather than falling into the hands of the demons. To ensure that Hong Xiuquan could never be a martyr, the Qing authorities dug up his body. They decapitated his corpse, burned his remains, and then, in a final act of symbolic destruction, mixed his ashes with gunpowder and fired them out of a cannon so that his spirit would have no resting place on earth. The Taiping Rebellion was over, but China was a graveyard. The war had killed more people than the Black Death had in 14th century Europe. Entire provinces were left empty. The Yangtze River, the lifeblood of the nation, had run red with blood for over a decade. The Qing Dynasty had won, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. To defeat the Taiping, the central government had been forced to give immense power to local provincial warlords, a move that would eventually lead to the collapse of the imperial system altogether in 1912. The legacy of the Brother of Jesus is one of history's most terrifying what-ifs. Hong Xiuquan was a man who failed a test and, in his grief, found a way to weaponize the desperate hopes of millions. He created a movement that promised equality and peace, but delivered only fire and blood. Even decades later, his influence remained. Mao Zedong, the founder of the People's Republic of China, would eventually cite Hong Xiuquan as one of his greatest inspirations, a peasant revolutionary who dared to challenge the established order. In the end, the Taiping Rebellion serves as a haunting reminder of the power of a single, charismatic idea in a broken world. It shows how quickly a promise of heaven can turn into a literal hell on earth when it is driven by fanaticism and fueled by the despair of the masses. 20 million people died for a kingdom that never existed, led by a man who dreamed he was a god, leaving behind a scar on the face of history that has never truly faded.